Hey Flower Tribe, it's Kelly Lehman and Lucy Lehman, and today we're going to answer the question, why aren't my hydrangeas blooming? So a lot of you have put in questions and comments below on YouTube and on Instagram, and one of the most popular questions that we have is, why aren't my hydrangeas blooming? And I'm going to give you a couple reasons why you might be having a problem getting blooms from your beautiful hydrangea. So guys, the first thing to consider is your hydrangea getting enough sunlight? So different varieties of hydrangea need different hours of sunlight. So these are endless summer, and these guys really enjoy having a lot of morning sun and then afternoon shade. But other hydrangeas like limelight hydrangea, they can take a full day of sun and do just fine. They can do spectacular. So it's really important to know what type of hydrangea you have first, and then take a look what the requirements for sun are, because they're going to be different for each plant. But most hydrangeas need at least partial sun to do really well. And like I said, some of them will do better in full sun, and there's some that do better with shade, especially in the afternoon. Most hydrangeas like a lot of sunlight in the morning and then a little bit of afternoon shade. Another thing to consider is, are my hydrangeas getting enough water? Hydrangeas love water. They really do, but they don't want to have wet feet. I want to show you the best way to water your hydrangeas, because if you don't provide enough water, you may not get blooms, and if you overwater your hydrangea, you also may not get blooms. And so let me show you how this works out. You had enough, Lucy? Okay, so you're going to water your hydrangeas at the base of the plant in the mornings. You don't want to do this at night. So you're going to come on to the base of the plant, and you're just going to give it a good soaking all the way around the plant, around the base of it. And you're going to do this when the soil feels dry. So a good rule of thumb is to put your finger in the soil about 1 or 2 inches deep, and if the soil's moist, your hydrangea probably doesn't need water. And if you feel the soil is very dry, then you're going to give it a good deep root watering. Now you don't want to do overhead watering, and I'm actually going to do it on this plant because we just had a huge rainstorm, so it already had an overhead watering. So when people overhead water like this, especially at night, the leaves get super wet and then they stay wet. And then what happens is sometimes temperatures drop during the nighttime, and that's when you start getting these spots on the plant. So if the plant is really wet at night and temperatures plummet, this is probably what's going to happen. So another reason why your hydrangeas might not be blooming is because you might have too much nitrogen in the soil. And I think this happens to a lot of people. And here's the story with nitrogen. Nitrogen promotes lots of beautiful, lush green leaves. And a lot of you have said, I have these beautiful hydrangea plants with beautiful green leaves and 0 blooms. And what happens is, if you have too much nitrogen in the soil, you're going to have a giant plant with gorgeous green leaves and probably hardly any blooms whatsoever, because it'll also kind of inhibit bloom growth because it's so busy helping the plant to have these gorgeous, lush leaves. And here's the thing, guys, when you fertilize your lawn, a lot of lawn fertilizers have a high concentration of nitrogen. So when you're looking at some products that have fertilizer in them, they usually have like 3 numbers. The first number is the nitrogen number. And if the nitrogen number is higher than the other 2 numbers, that means that that fertilizing product has a high nitrogen concentration. And then when people fertilize their lawns, sometimes some of those sprinkles get put into the garden bed. And then all of a sudden you have a very high nitrogen level in your soil, and you're going to have super beautiful green leaves, but no bloom. So keep an eye on that, guys. And I'm going to put a link below for places where you can get your soil tested to see where what your nitrogen levels are. There's a lot of organizations state to state that you can kind of do a soil sample and send it into, and they'll let you know what your nitrogen levels look like if they're high or low. So that's the nitrogen story. And another reason why your hydrangeas may not be blooming is because you might have pruned them at the wrong time of year. So if you guys went and pruned some of your, especially Nico hydrangeas back, like in the beginning of spring, it means that you cut back a lot of the buds that were forming on last year's old growth, and you're not going to see any blooms this year because you kind of cut them all back by accident. And we have a video that kind of explains this called How to Get More Blooms from Your Hydrangea, and we'll put a link for that below also. So make sure that you don't over prune your hydrangeas. The rule of thumb with hydrangea pruning is plant it in a spot where it's happy, And if you don't have to prune it because you don't need to like make it shorter to fit in the bed better, or if it hasn't given you blooms for years and you might want to just give it like a little recharge, I hardly ever prune my hydrangeas back. These guys haven't been pruned back in probably 3 years, and I get beautiful blooms from them. So don't over prune your hydrangeas. Winter zap is another reason why your hydrangeas may not be giving you blooms. So guys, I'm out here in spring. It's a little bit after Mother's Day with my endless summer hydrangea row, and I want to show you what happened to these gals. So a lot of these buds were formed on what's called old wood. So these stems were from last year, and what happened was sometime after summer, these new little buds and these new stems of growth started forming on the old wood. Now what happened was we had a super warm January and February, and so instead of just being little tiny nubs that are kind of protected on these wooden stems, I started to get a lot of leaves and a lot of growth, and it's almost like the plant was tricked into thinking it was spring, and it started to develop a lot of these early flowers early on. And the problem happened when we got a huge freeze later on in the season. So we had temperatures that dropped below freezing, like later on, like in early spring, and actually we had snow here just a few days ago in May. And that snow and the freezing zapped these plants. And what's probably going to happen is these gals are probably not going to give me any kind of flowers on the blooms that you see now, because you can tell they're all kind of brown, they're all kind of frozen off, so they got what I call a winter zap. Your plant's age may also have something to do with why it may not be blooming. Younger plants sometimes don't produce blooms, and they take a few years to get established before you see those beautiful blooms come into place. So this guy's about a year old, so there's no blooms yet, but it will be worth the wait. And then over here is a hydrangea that's about 2 years old, 2 or 3 years old, and so the blooms are starting to come. And then after a few years, they're going to be magnificent. Another reason why you might not be getting blooms from your hydrangea is you might have gotten a hydrangea as a gift, like around Easter or Mother's Day, Passover, and a lot of times those are kind of like the florist gift hydrangeas that were grown in greenhouses. They're not very hardy, and they might not grow in your planting zone. So make sure that the hydrangea that you have belongs in your planting zone, because a lot of times these cute little gifty hydrangeas that come in like the little tin foil with the pink or the purple, a lot of times they're kind of like, you know, grown in a greenhouse setting, and they have a hard time lasting in a field, and they might not belong in your hardiness zone. So make sure that you know what your planting hardiness zone is, and if your hydrangea belongs there. You might just, might be able to grow that in your neck of the woods. And so those are some of the major reasons why your hydrangeas may not be blooming in your area. And I hope you guys learned a lot from this video. And let me know if you have any questions or comments about other flowers or hydrangeas, and I'd love to make videos to answer them. And let me know where you guys are viewing this from in this great big beautiful world. I love to see how our flower tribe is growing around the globe each year. And I will see you guys in the next video.